So, John, especially in the last 10 years, while growing up, listening to you, listening to Peter Drury, listening to Jim Proudfoot and Clive Tildesley, all of these people, it was such a pleasure for us, especially how much it enhanced our Premier League watching experience. And I really can't believe the fact that I've roamed that entire circle and I'm now finally got in touch with you as well. So I had a conversation with all of you now. It feels so outstanding. And thank you so much, firstly, for all the energy that you've added
Thank
to our viewing experience. It is such a pleasure to have a conversation with you in person. So, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for the invitation to join you. It's lovely to talk to you. I think we're all mentioned, and the wider circle of commentators are fortunate to work on the Premier League in particular because it's such an exciting competition. And it
Indeed.
kind of makes our jobs because the energy, the excitement is there. Sometimes you have to generate it because the occasion is not so good in other competitions, but not in the Premier League. I think 2020 has been an interesting experience, everyone across the planet, of course, but just on the sort of micro level of being a Premier League commentator, it's been quite because some of that energy, obviously, is the packed houses every week, the full crowds, and we just haven't had those. So we've had to investigate one or two other ways of trying to create that energy and excitement. Not always, because it's a very different event and product, as you will gauge when you watch
Yeah.
it at the moment. Hopefully, we'll be back to sometime in 2021.
Yeah, that's amazing. So first things first, I know it's I must say it's not any of my business, honestly, but we really miss your voice in the Premier League. And how has it
Yeah.
been in the US for you? And I know you've already given some moments, as Prathamesh was mentioning just now, the LA Derby that he was mentioning about. So you've really gotten into the groove in MLS as well. I hope it's been great, but was there any particular reason behind the transition from Premier League to the MLS?
There were lots of reasons.
Mm.
One of them is that it's not necessarily forever. And I'm a firm believer that whilst we all revere football and it's a central part of our lives, it's not the entirety of our lives.
True.
And I just thought
Yeah.
that for me, and it would be a great experience to come and live in a country. I know we share a language with the Americans, but it's quickly struck me that we don't share too much else besides that. Fascinating experience living 3.5 across the Atlantic. I've been here for nearly 2 years now. I signed up for 5, and I just figured that lucky to be able to do everything that I do in broadcasting in Europe and more. 8 World Cups so far, all the European Championships every in between the World Cups, the Premier League, the FA Cup, the big Champions League games. Anything I did based in England was just going to be. Whereas by coming here, I get experience. So does my family. The youngest of my 4 children actually gets to go to an American high school for a couple of years. Experience for him, and as a broadcaster, because I have to get to know people. I have the history. The games are very played on artificial surfaces. The climate plays a part as well. The wild variations across this vast country, coupled with the fact that broadcasting on America totally different to European TV, not least because not only am I the commentator as well, and it would be the same if I were the doyen of American sports broadcasters, who's the main NFL commentator. He has to go on football in front of 35 million people and then commentate on it, which is unheard of in Europe. Yeah. And I have to do the same with Major League Soccer, or last night I did T20 in America, which was an international, albeit not in a FIFA window, played in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, between the US and El Salvador. I had to present as well. So that's been something I've had to learn. And I took the decision when I was 53 years of age. And I just thought, if 63, I'd probably be too and set in my ways, and I would find an excuse not to do it. And then later on in life, I'd look back and regret not. So after 4 having had the offer there, if I wanted to go, I just thought now's the time. So for all those reasons, I just decided it was a fascinating option. Growing league, Major League Soccer, and it's growing fast. Soccer, football is the most teenagers across the United States. translating into television viewing habits as well. So in another 10, 15 years, it will be knocking on the door of basketball, ice hockey, probably not the NFL £1,000 gorilla in the corner of every room in the United States. But it will be up there as a. I'd love to be part of that process. Like I was lucky enough to work through the exponential growth of the Premier League in those early years after it started too.
John, last time that when we had a conversation with Derek Ray, he did talk about this prior to the interview. Both of you live pretty close by in Boston, and considering the lockdown months, even though back earlier than almost all other, or even for that matter, all other occupations for the people in general, how were those? It must have been so strange for you, void of the beautiful game, which has essentially been your life in your professional career.
Yeah, I mean, I can take you through my 2020, which probably tells you what. So I began the year back home in the UK with my family, and I called a game on New Year's Day between Saturday, and then 4 days later I came back to prepare for the start of their season, which usually gets underway at the end of February. And everything was going well, and we did our first league soccer season, and I flew to the first one and to Portland, Oregon for the second, and then I got on a plane to go back with my family because we had a 3-week break between fixtures. And there was this virus that had started apparently in China and was heading our way. And I don't think anyone assessed at that stage quite what it was going to have. And I got on a plane for a 2-week trip back home. And by the time I got off the plane at Heathrow in London, President Trump had closed the borders back to come back. And I fretted about, well, how am I going to perform my job? And it rapidly became clear there was going to be no job to perform because everything was cancelled. But as we all know, everything. Halt. So I was stuck in the UK for nearly 4 months until the end of June. And eventually I got a travel extension from the US government who wanted to get back up and running. And as a sort of ancillary worker to a professional sports competition, I was regarded to the operation to be allowed a waiver in. So I flew back on the 30th of June from a deserted Heathrow. It was one of the eeriest walking into the vast terminal building there. One check-in desk, and I got here, and eventually, about 3 weeks beyond, the restart in a bubble. So, world in Florida, in Orlando, took all 26 teams and set up this bubble, and remarkably, a big portion of their so-called regulars back up and running. So, I was, to answer your original question, I was devoid of football really for months, which was tough. But what I did, I suppose because my voice is reasonably well known, still connected with the Premier League around the world, I was doing all sorts of things like this. Every day there would be a call with broadcasters in Ghana or Australia or America or Canada or wherever it might be. And we would just chew the fat and talk football, and it was a distraction. And I really enjoyed doing that. It never quite takes the place of being at a match and broadcasting in the way that I'm used to. It is a good substitute in time. So that then took me through before I came back to the US. The league got back up and running, and we've just been dancing around really between positive tests for players and staff here, trying to get all the. Remarkably, they pretty much managed it. But the big difference for me is that all the games have had to be off monitor from a TV studio at ESPN's headquarters in Connecticut, about 100 miles north of New York City, because it's not been deemed safe enough for us to fly around the United States because of the way that the virus we control here in a way that it shouldn't be, but they've never really succeeded in clamping down on it in any form. There isn't really the public will. It's a very attitude because of the Constitution and the idea of liberties and personal freedoms. But that's a whole other conversation. But that's carried me through anyway, that work until I came in Fort Lauderdale, the US, and El Salvador. So I broadcast, I think, 40 games in a row off a TV screen, a studio where in the commercial break, having the program in my smart suit with a tie and a lapel mic, I have to throw off the lapel mic and the jacket and the tie and down to a couple of monitors, put on a headset, microphone, and commentate on the game. End of the first half, do the reverse change, back in front of the camera, smile, it on, do up my tie, do the half-time, then back second. It's been a really weird experience. So when I get back to London next week, I'm doing Liverpool-Tottenham Wednesday night for Amazon, the domestic rights holders, which will be it's probably the game of the season so far. But I'm going to have to get used to commentating in the British way again and actually being a stadium, being at Anfield, a place I'm so used to being at. But I haven't commentated on a game in any of my last 40 matches from the stadium. I've been looking at a TV camera. So it's going to be a real experience.
Yeah, and your voice is so synonymous with football. We were listening to you right there. All I could think of were the fabulous moments, and I'd like Anurag to please continue.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I often get that, and I'm sure Peter Drury and Derek Ray and Clive and the other people you've spoken to said this. Yeah, it's a great honour to cover the Premier League, but it is the sport that matters. We often get patted on the back for what's perceived as a wonderful commentary. Well, in fact, the root of that is not skills, but it's probably a wonderful piece of play out on the pitch, which we've been lucky enough to witness. Then we just have to let our own emotion, and I suppose experience and what broadcasting skills we have, ride that wave, but the wave is created by the players.
Yeah.
So the Premier is an interesting debate, but the Premier League is probably one of the easier leagues to broadcast because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting take, and segueing into a slightly different conversation. What we do know for a fact is that you started very early as a broadcaster. As you just mentioned, you were 19, and it was 84, 85. That was the time when you started. So if you could just talk us through your early days, and it was with BBC Sport and BBC Radio, as you've just mentioned. So if you could just talk us through those days.
It was. Yeah. So I started completely by accident. At the age, I was hopeless at school, dreadful at exams. So at 19, I left school not knowing what was going to be next for me. And so I resolved that I would take her to decide, because my end of school exam results were not good enough to go to university. So I decided I'd have a year, I would work once and use the money to go traveling around the world. I got myself a job stacking books on shelves at a big academic library in Yorkshire, the British Lending Library, this worldwide institution, which basically specialized in providing materials in the pre-internet days for academics around the world. So someone from the University of Sydney in Australia might write a letter to this library and say, I need an article from a particular magazine from 1932. Please, can you send it to me? And I receive the letter, go into this vast warehouse, the article, photocopy it, put it in an envelope and send it by post to the other side of the world. So that it was fairly menial, but it's the money I thought to go traveling. Halfway through that period, I played a game of cricket in my home city of York in the north of England. I was a wonderful cricketer, but it was the sport I could play at any other. And I did reasonably well. I got a few runs. My side won the game. And I was in the clubhouse, in the bar afterwards, and the payphone in the corner in the day. I don't want to portray myself as ancient, but this is both pre-internet and pre-mobile phones.
Yeah.
So the payphone rang, and someone called me across and said, it's the local radio station. They want to interview you about your fabulous innings today. Well, I'd had a couple of beers by this stage. So I went and picked up the phone, and this gentleman asked me a few questions. I didn't really give it a second thought, gave a couple of answers. He said, thank you very much. It's been nice to you. And I went back and had a few more drinks and had a very good night. Later, phone call at home. I was still living with my parents at that point, and it was the sports editor, newly established BBC local radio station, saying that they'd like the sound of my voice in this interview. I'd sounded very fluent. That was probably something to do with the beer. And setting up a sports department, and we're looking for to cover some football and some rugby that winter, just to go on a Saturday to a local match and do some phone report. Not complicated. There was no money in it, but they said it's fun. Do you fancy it? I had nothing better to do, and it sounded like it would be a good thing to try. So I did it. Again, seemed to go well. And 6 weeks further down the line, another call at home. The manager of the radio station this time saying, we've been really surprised at how natural you sound there. Are you enjoying it? And I said, well, yeah, I'm having great. But I wasn't thinking deeply about it. And he went on to say, he surprised me. He said, we think you've really got a chance of making something of this if you're interested. Would you like to go down that route? I said, well, of course, yeah, I'd like to pursue this. And he went on to explain that the BBC as an organization would only take graduates. So it was essential that I got myself on a degree course somewhere. So I managed to get, at 2 weeks' notice, on a course snappily titled Communicational Studies with Public Media, which was, I suppose, the forerunner of what today would be a media degree. It was built on elements of psychology, sociology, and a little bit of media. And it was at a Catholic teacher training college in the city of Leeds. So this was a completely different environment for me. I wasn't brought up as a Catholic. 2 weeks of being in the Hall of Residence, lyrics to every song by the Pogues, the Irish folk band, because many of the other students there were from Catholic seminary, who were there ultimately to train either to be teachers or probably priests. So I entered this whole new world, and every weekend the BBC would give me work to do, send me to a match, and this work got better and better. And before long, they were ringing up and actually saying, why don't you leave that course behind? They'd forgotten that they told me that I needed a degree against my name. Come and work for us now, come and have a proper job. And I said, no, I'm going to finish this, get my qualifications in case this broadcasting business doesn't work out. So I stuck it. They gave me more and more work. And then 6 weeks before my finals, they called me up. And it was comical, really, because of the lack of communication. I picked up the phone, ringing at the college in my hall of residence. A very prim and proper lady with received pronunciation said, hello, John? I said, yes. It's Miss Jack, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, London W1. I said, Miss Jackson, it's very nice to talk to you. Why are you calling? Has nobody spoken to you about the job? She sounded frightening, even from 200 miles away on the phone. And I said, no, the job, you're going to have to enlighten me. Well, they have a job for a sports reporter somewhere in the region of England, I believe, a place called Leeds. I believe you know it. We booked you in for an interview on Friday noon, 3 o'clock. These are the questions that ask you. And these, she said, stressing, these are the answers that we want you to produce. Get to wear a tie. So essentially, it was they decided they wanted me. They told me what the interview questions were going to be and what the answers should be as well. So I did the interview, parroted the answers that I'd been rehearsed a few days, managed not to say anything too stupid, and got the job. And I started just after my college finals. So I did that for 18 months. Then again, got offered a job by National Radio in London. So at the age of 24, I went down to work at Broadcasting House in central London and was on the World Service and the main net in the UK. And within 3 months, I was being sent to the World Cup in Italy in 1990 to host that. I was sent to the Olympics in Barcelona. I went on to do 2 subsequent Olympics off the back of that. And the beauty of working for the BBC and radio was that they had the broadcast rights to everything. So I went everywhere, right across the world, time and time, all the big events. It was magnificent. But I was going at that stage mainly as a presenter. And then one day there was FA Cup tie, 5th round FA Cup, Swindon, Aston Villa, at the county ground in Swindon. And it was due to be commentated on by Mike Ingham, the esteemed radio football correspondent for many years, 3 or 4 years ago. And he fell ill overnight, and they were looking for someone at very short notice that could get to Swindon Void. And I'd done quite a lot of commentary in my local time, so they knew that I could do it. But this was a big step up in front of a much bigger audience. Unfortunately, my co-commentator was Marshall, the former Northern Ireland national, played in the World Cup, the man that managed Leicester and Celtic and sundry other teams, and most Republic of Ireland, who's a very loquacious individual. And he put me at my ease and was very easy to work with, and we got through it. And I remember that a guy called Steve, a spectacular winning goal for Aston Villa in the second half from 35 yards, and I managed to describe it reasonably well and capture the moment. And then that persuaded the management that, in fact, they could more usefully utilize me as a commentator. And I was very keen to be out at those events on a weekly basis rather than in a studio in London. So there was a sort of metamorphosis from mainly presenting to mainly commentating. I was then in on the start of the Premier League in 1992, carried on doing that for 3 more years. I'm aware this is probably a world record for the longest answer to a question, but hopefully I'm in the information. And then in 1995, I did the radio commentary at Selhurst Park the night that Eric Cantona jumped into the crowd in the game between Crystal Palace and Manchester United. Do you remember it?
Yes, I remember.
We both are United fans, by the way, so yeah.
So we would remember that.
Yeah.
Yes, so Eric Cantona getting sent off and then launching himself with 2 feet into the crowd, into the chest of this thug, Matthew Simmons, who'd been dreadful abuse at him. And I did the radio commentary, and the person that did it on TV didn't notice it and missed it. So I got more publicity out of that because I'd actually been lucky enough, my eyes were in the right place and had seen more than I'd described it. And the head of television sport at the BBC was listening, and they were looking to replace on a temporary basis John Motson, who was probably the country's most famous commentator. They were giving him a year's sabbatical. So off the back of that, I got my chance and was offered a job on Match of the Day, the Premier League highlights show every week on BBC One on a night, fronted by Gary Lineker now. Then it was a chap called Desmond Lynham, and Gary was one of the pundits. So I did that for 6 years. The BBC lost all their football rights due to the financial pressures, so I moved across to the main commercial station, ITV, did the Champions League, Premier League, World Cups and things for them. Still occasionally worked for them. I did the last World Cup TV in Russia. And then when the live Premier League rights in the UK moved beyond Sky first time to a company called Setanta, I became their lead commentator for the Premier League, and they were replaced by ESPN, who set up an arm in the UK. I took the same role there. And then more recently, it's been this move to the States. But for the last 20 years, I suppose the reason that you've heard my voice is that I've been one of the commentators on the world feed for the Premier League. So I've probably been doing that since about 1996, something like that. Long time.
Fabulous. And you said this might be a world record in terms of the answer. I would never ever ask you to stop when you're explaining so methodically, because you perfectly encapsulated the next question that I had, that whether football was the primary driver in terms of the sports that you wanted to cover in your broadcasting career, or if you swayed to work for other sports. And as you mentioned, you've covered from the Olympics to rugby, and the list just goes on and on. Any particular non-footballing sporting event that that's been very how do I say very pertinent, or sorry, very I for you in terms of covering it ever?
Yes, I mean lots, because I've been lucky enough to go to so many, and some things good, things bad, some things tragic. So my experiences would include things like watching Muhammad Ali, riven by Parkinson's disease, to lift the torch to light the Olympic flag. That was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I was in Centennial Park in Georgia when the bomb went off during the Olympic Games. That was terrifying. And yet I've seen some of the most uplifting things as well. Great athletes doing things. But if you ask me about perhaps favorite broadcasting experiences, it was in the time before I left the BBC. I had the thrill of being part of the Test match commentary team on the radio so working with people that you will have heard of, like Christopher Martin Jenkins, Henry Blofeld, and at the time, like John Arlott had retired and had gone, but that tradition, Brian Johnston, and some of the great players as well. And in my local radio days, I think I had a similar to my colleague and friend Peter Drury, in that we were both working in Yorkshire when Sachin Tendulkar was playing there. And I think Peter and I up against a wall. And in terms of a day out watching sport, what would you most like to do? We'd probably both choose a cricket match, if we're being truthful. Not football, but just the nuances of cricket. And we are both of a generation, I think I can speak for him on this, where we prefer a 5-day test match to a 20 bash and go. We just like the subtle nuances, and we like sitting there with a glass of wine or whatever to take it all in. So doing that for 3 years with those iconic figures was a huge thrill, because you were aware you were a program that was so much more than just the cricket, because the success of Test Match Special has been that they talk about everything but the cricket most of the time. And it does test you at the broadcaster, and it means that you do need to have a hinterland. You can't take anything too seriously. Anyone could walk into the commentary box, a famous politician, a prime minister, a president, a pop star, an actor, and you have to be able to adjust on the fly to that. So that taught me an awful lot about broadcasting as well. And cricket is a luxury of a commentate on the radio, particularly because you have the time between each ball to actually paint the picture. And that is something you don't often get.
Yeah.
Because ball is such a fast sport. Horse racing, you're just shouting the horses. Athletics, just shouting the names of the athletes. And then you move from radio to television. And in fact, it's not you to describe the physical scene, because 25 around a football pitch or a cricket pitch are doing that for you. So yes, I would say that doing the cricket on the road probably as exhilarating and as I've ever had.
That's really amazing. Especially we cater to the Indian audience predominantly, so I think they would absolutely love this bit. So, uh, you know, we one of the things that Kushagra and I we both share is that we do observe and we do listen. We analyze, not to a great extent, but we do listen and come to a conclusion if a commentary on a game was good or bad, it was brilliant or something like that. If it is needed or not, that's a secondary thing. But we do have conversations about that. But over the last 10 years, especially for us, listening to you and Peter Drury was absolutely epic. I can definitely remember the first time I heard your voice, at least what I remember, you shouting Michael Owen's winner at the Old Trafford against Manchester City. That still rings in my ears to a great extent. Peter Drury describes himself as one of those people who loves articulating a game in a sort of a flowery way. This is what he said. It's not something I'm saying. He likes to paint a picture in a very poetic sense. That's what he does. And Jim Proudfoot, another person that we had a conversation with, he likes to keep it very simple. That's what he said. So, how would you describe yourself in this regard?
Probably somewhere between because I think TV, when you move to TV, it's a bit like putting a straitjacket on as a broadcast. You've come from a radio background where essentially the equivalent of an artist sitting in front of your easel, and you've got a blank canvas, palette of paints, and you can paint the pictures in any way. You can be impressionistic, you can be just straight down the middle, but your words will bring everything. You are key to the listener. Without you, there is nothing. On television, 95% of that job is done by other people and other things. So the cameras, sound, the crowd, big factor, the crowd, I think plays a huge part in a good commentary, because if you see a wonderful goal, it's me to wax lyrical in them about how wonderful the goal is, because you can see how good the goal is. If I'm very excited in the way I shout, oh, and then the counts to 60,000 people going wild, there is nothing in that moment that I or anyone else can say that will end the moment. There's something I can say 10 seconds down as the excitement is subsiding slightly. So it's about discipline as a TV commentator and not getting in the way. So because of that, I don't. There's a limit to what you can give, I think, to a television broadcast. And when I first moved across from radio to TV, I used to come on TV games thinking, well, I didn't have to do a lot today. But it's only when you sit back and analyze it and think, it's a very different job, because you're producing a lot less. It's a good job we're not being paid by the word on the TV.
Yeah.
But you've got to speak at the right time and find the right words. The key, really. You've just got to be more selective. And you can't really let yourself be carried away with the emotion of the moment for too long. Yeah, by all means, if you see it, go with it. But don't ruin the fact that goal. It's a bit like being a referee. If you have a good referee of a football match, you don't notice them. I do think, for the most part, you shouldn't be noticing the commentator, because if you are, the chances are they're getting in the way. Yes, if he or she comes out with a great line, okay, that's wonderful, and that's part of the role as well. But don't be the prime focus, because that belongs to the sporting event that's unfolding in front of you.
Yeah, that is great. It sort of falls along the lines of what I heard Barry Davis once say. I've never heard the man, because I think he belongs to an entirely different generation, but he loves the moment doing all the talking. So I think that's what you emphasize on.
Well, when I joined the BBC The Day team, the two main commentators were this guy I was replacing, John Motson, and Barry Davis was the other. And those two had been the top commentators in Britain for 30 years.
Yeah.
And they were totally different. So talks a lot on the television and is very excitable and does reams and reams of preparation. So if somebody scores on me, then he'll be able to tell you how many previous goals he's scored off his left knee, strange things like that. And he'll know the inside of every player on the pitch. Barry came out the wider view and just allowed himself to be led by the event that unfolded in front of him. And he was very disciple of what he would describe to me as more, because he was great. They both were in different ways in giving me advice when I was trying to learn the craft. Both of them said, you don't need to speak very much at all. And I still say that to young broadcasters that come to me now. I think the best broadcasters are the bravest broadcasters, and the bravest ones that are quite happy to lay out and let the pictures and the sound and the fans do the majority of the. And Barry was the master at that. I mean, I thank goodness for YouTube. I would recommend if you ever have a spare hour, go back to YouTube and just look for some of his great moments. And he has some magnificent lines which weren't scripted on a piece of, they just came from his brain to his mouth moment, and he just captures them perfectly. So he was very influential on Aspire to be anywhere near as good as him, but he masterful broadcaster, and actually suffered in some ways in terms of his perception amongst the management of the BBC. Here was this urbane individual who came up with the right words at the right time, and then set alongside him was John Motson, equally brilliant but different way, and perhaps a slightly populist way. One was tabloid, one was broadsheet. And Barry maybe suffered a little in terms of some of the assignments that he got, but now when you are, they miss him so badly. Happily, he's still alive, very good health in his 80s, lives in London, still watches and speak to him. We meet up occasionally when I'm back in the, but he did it in the way that I think it should be done.
That's amazing to actually, get that insight from you. And as two people who actually are trying to get to a level where we can present live sport, it's absolutely beautiful to actually hear from, understand what the nuances are of this particular career here. Another moment that I remember quite vividly from your broadcasting career is the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. A massive event for more reasons than one. Of course, with Spain actually winning the whole tournament. You've done so many different World Cups. You've gone to the first ever World Cup on the soil, then back to it, probably the spirit of football, then to a World Cup which was mired in a bit of controversy in Russia. Is it stressful, according to you, that in an off season that you're going to do the World Cup, or do you honestly look at it as an opportunity for yourself to actually better yourself in terms of your career?
They are the events on which we're more than any other. So I think if there's any stress, just knowing you've got to perform at your best, and that this is a big, broad platform with huge audiences. But I claim that it's stressful in any other way. I mean, people would laugh if I said, oh, it's dreadfully stressful going to a World Cup. No, it's a joy. And I now, with 8 in my back pocket, I suppose I've a reasonable overview of the different flavors. I mean, I loved World Cup 90 in Italy because it was my first. 94 was tough. That was probably the worst one, United States, in my experience, just because the sport really hadn't taken off and you wouldn't know it was on. As you travel, you go through airports, no banners, no flags, just might as well not have been happening. 98 was terrific in France. That's one of my favorites. 02 was in South Korea and Japan, largely because of the fact that South Korea went so far in the tournament on this wave of, yes, refereeing decisions on occasions. Hiddink just got that side playing in a way that it was extraordinary. And I'd never seen mass celebrations on a scale like those at the South Koreans, where every fan was wearing a red record. And you would look around a stadium in Seoul or Ulsan or wherever it might be, that they were, and the noise was unbelievable as they knocked out team after team. So that lingers with me. 06, Germany World Cup. 2010, history said 2014, testing, because Brazil, in terms of its infrastructure, was, just leave it and say, interesting. And then 20, I think I would categorize again as one of my favorites. And I'm surprised to be saying that to you, because I think we all worried about, goodness me, that country embraced the World Cup show. And I now have very fond memories of my time spent traveling around Russia. I saw things that I never thought I'd get to see, because it's such a big country, and I go many times for things like Champions League, but never really beyond. But some of the other cities and some of the history that's there, well off the tourist map. I'm really lucky to see and experience that, and to feel the embrace of a portion of the Russian people as well. It was interesting that when you met the Russians out on the older Russians who lived through the communist era were still very suspicious of all us Western visitors. But the younger generation, 40 and below, who are internet tech savvy, have seen what life is like in the West. They just wanted to talk to us. Many of them spoke great English, and they were welcome visitors to their country to show them what they're about. So there was that fascinating dichotomy as we traveled around. But yeah, Russia, surprising, amongst my favorite World Cups as well.
That's absolutely fantastic. Anurag, if you could unmute yourself, I think you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. So, you talk about all these amazing World Cups and amazing memories, but again, as a commentator, sometimes you are witnessing some of the most weirdest things happen on a football pitch. Now, in cricket, there are some occasions when there is a streaker coming in. Obviously, one of the most iconic image of the 80s was Botham and the streaker, obviously, and there are some many weird things happening. But as a part of the research, a few days back, I was just surfing through many videos, and I found myself listening to watching the 2014 World Cup where Luis Suarez bit Chiellini, and if I'm not wrong, you were on that game. If I'm not wrong, so and moments like that, it's incredibly weird, and it's sort of something you don't expect on a football pitch. So, what is one of the weirdest things that you had to commentate on, if you could think of any?
I mean, weird. And what's even weirder is that Suarez now, I think, has bitten 3 people on a football pitch in a professional match.
Yeah.
And I've been there because I'd also seen him fight Branislav at a Liverpool-Chelsea game as well. And I think you just go with the moment. Weird. I think the most offbeat thing, but also nearly the most tragic thing, without being too downbeat, was being the commentator for an FA Cup at White Hart Lane, the old home of Tottenham. 2013, when Fabrice Muamba collapsed on the pitch, the Bolton Wanderers player, having had a cardiac arrest.
My word, yeah.
Effectively died and was brought extraordinarily. And so having to commentate live on national television through that, I mean, there's nothing that can prepare for that experience. So the only thing you can rely upon is hopefully a bit of a sense of humanity and a bit not to feel that you have to talk if you've got nothing to, because the stadium was hushed with quiet, and we saw a man after Muamba he'd been down with no one near him, probably for 10 minutes. People were frantically around him, but there seemed to be no direction to what they were doing to try and help him. And then a man, crowd, managed to evade a policeman who tried him and ran onto the pitch. And it transpired that he was an eminent cardiologist who had recognized from a distance what he's doing to Muamba. And his intervention in Muamba's life on the pitch and in the tunnel that night. He was theoretically dead in terms of his heart having stopped for over an hour, broadcast through all of this. And in the media era, obviously you are being buffeted with things, people saying, oh, he's died. Not true. But there, and it's in the public domain. So how made by that? How much do you put this into the context of other athletes who have died in action of a sporting contest? I did in my catalogue have a referee who I'd seen collapse and die in the middle of a professional football match, which was a horrible experience. I'd seen one other player on a football pitch as well, who played for my hometown club, York, in the lower leagues, a guy called David Longhurst. Very similar circumstance, and I suppose that instructed me in dealing with the Muamba case. But that was just about the toughest challenge in casting career. So you asked me about things that you can't prepare for, and yeah, you're quite right to say people biting other players, but I think Muamba happened to him, and there's a happy ending to it, so it's easier to talk. even now, it's quite difficult to remember that day without a tear welling up.
Yeah.
So John, from this quite a actually a in a manner if that actually put it, it's quite a touching way to approach this subject, in that sense. And I remember that quite clearly, that particular match, when Muamba went down, we as an audience had absolutely no clue. We just had our point of reference was the people, were the people actually playing the game, and you being one of them. I think it was quite an important part that you played, in terms of trying to spread the right kind of information. As you on social media, all it takes is one tweet and 1,000 retweets, and people
Yeah.
consider it as a fact, and that's a little sad. I would like to just this particular question slightly more positively. Just to round up, if you could just pick out one of the best moments of your career, something that if it can either when you were in a stadium just as a fan, and something maybe we all may have not known as one champion as a fan.
Well, I suppose as a fan, my formative experience was watching my local team, York, who are the championship and are currently in the 6th tier. They're having their darkest days at the moment, but they're a famous cup fighting team. So many of the most favoured experiences of watching would be from those early days, watching them. I've seen them beat Manchester United in a cup competition. I've seen them beat Chelsea. I've seen Everton. I've seen them beat Arsenal, famously, in the FA Cup. And I've seen them draw twice with Liverpool. My earliest commentaries was on a snow at Bootham Crescent, the home of York, when they drew Liverpool in the 5th round of the FA Cup, and it was Kenny Dalglish's Liverpool. They were good. And the game in this day and age been played, there's no undersoil heating at lower league grounds. But I still remember the thrill of commentating on that as my big match. And that was my transition, really, from having on the terraces to suddenly being the man with the microphone who's got to take on board the responsibilities that come with that. Thankfully, part of the BBC training is partiality. So it is drilled into you that even if it is your team that is playing, the other team are watching as well. So there is no room for any party either way. You've got to be absolutely down the middle. And that was a good early test, really, watching my team beat Liverpool. They eventually got taken to a replay at Anfield in extra time. But that's a very fond memory. But I think the best I have of watching football is just a personal one. And it's the reason that the job I do now and the reason that football has been such a part of my life, which is that when I was a child growing up in York, I lived a mile from the football ground. And on a Saturday afternoon, I could hear the crowd roaring at 3 o'clock when the game. My parents were very keen that I should be. So they gave me music lessons, endless music lessons from the age of 4, and sent me to orchestra practice on a Saturday when all I do was go to the football. And so after many battles at home, I was finally allowed my first professional football match to this place, which was also absolutely next door to the school that I used to go to. And when we played football in the play, sometimes we'd kick the ball over the wall and it's football ground, and I'd have to go and get it back and do battle with the groundsman who'd come at me with his pitchfork because he didn't want little kids running around. So the only time I'd been in there was to get our ball back round game. Finally, at the age of 12, we're having lunch one day at home, and my parents have invited a friend of mine who's a big football fan. And I think this is my chance, because my mum and dad would never take me. So I harangued this poor man about football. I knew a match that afternoon. And I went on and on and on about it. I must have been a real pain. And eventually my parents just said, okay, we give up. You can go if Ken, their friend, will take you. I looked at Ken and he nodded. And I thought, great, I'm in. And so amidst great, in the depths of an English winter, York were playing Newport in the 4th division, as it then was. This was pre-Premier League. This would be 1978, January 78. I was 12 years of age. So I was given a flask of tea to keep me warm. I remember my mother putting a scarf round, woolly hat on my head, giving me a pair of, I wasn't even noticing really, because all I wanted to do was get to the game. And it was a 5-minute walk, and we walked the street, we turned the corner into the road where the ground, I could suddenly hear the chants of the crowd, and I could see this swell of people approaching the football, all wearing their club colours and singing, chanting. And we got to the gates of the football ground, and we were shoulder to shoulder with people trying to get to the turnstiles. And I could smell Bovril, a sort of beef-based drink. It's a horrible thing, but it was sold at every football ground. And you could smell the onion, the horrible burgers and hot dogs that they were. And then we walked past the back of the main stand, where the dressing rooms were, and you could smell the liniments that were rubbing into their muscles to get them loose on a cold day. And then we got to the turnstile, and this chap Ken handed me, I think, a note, as it then was. And I went in, and I remember going in, and the click of the turnstile, and I was barely tall enough to see over the top to see where the operator was taking the money. And then we were inside, and there was this swaying mass of people, and inserted ourselves in the middle of it. And then the players ran out, and the volume level went up fourfold. Game kicked off, and this drama was just yards away from us, and the pace and the sounds, the thud of boot on ball, mud flying from when the goalkeeper dived. In front of us, we were right behind the net, tipping a ball around a post. This was just a magic that I never experienced before. And from that moment, I was hooked. Such a profound effect on me that you could go to a public arena like this and be part of this communal experience that just took people over in terms of its meaning and its significance. It was the thing that they lived for every week, the Saturday afternoon football. And it took 12 years to experience it from coming into this world, but tried to make up for missing those 12 years ever since. So if you ask me for one football memory, it's a very personal one, and it's indulgent, but that is mine.
Yeah, John, one thing that we can, both Kushagra and I can say after having interviewed so many commentators is that when we start a discussion, when we think it is going to be 30 minutes, it's just definitely going to be around about 45, 50 minutes, because the discussions are just so beautiful and just so engaging. And I must admit, this is the most engaging discussion and the most, I've heard you, articulate so many football anecdotes and stories, or the football happenings on the field. But all these personal life stories that you explained, it really brought a smile on my face. It's been very weird temperatures in Hyderabad, very cranky. But I think this was such a delightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining. We've loved listening to you over the years, and we would love listening to you in the future as well. Thank you again for joining.
It's been a great thrill to go down memory lane with you and relive many that I've been lucky enough to have. And I'm delighted that you enjoy the Premier League. And I'm looking forward to broadcasting a game across India for the first time in a while. Wow. Manchester United is on the Sunday before Christmas. So that for me is, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
The pleasure was all ours, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And Indians, whoever is watching, again, John Champion is very soon going to be back. So obviously, it's going to be very exciting. So until then, please do subscribe to the Sports Doyen for many more such interviews. You can go through our channel for many more such amazing commentators and their stories. So thank you so much for tuning in, and take care.